what we call a disease is your body trying to adapt under unideal circumstances to keep you alive. Magnesium is responsible for over 650 biochemical processes that we're aware of. We seek out different foods based on the flavor, based on our cells' needs. This is the big secret that shouldn't be a secret.
Being a person in the health space and then raising children, how did you kind of balance that process? And was there any pushback? Maybe that's a loaded question.
Absolutely. You know what? This is the thing. It's a very different reality when you have kids, because there was a time, when my wife and I first got together, we could just do shit. We could just go.
Right.
Hey, you want to go? Do we just go? Now every decision we make is like, where are they at? Right? Who is getting who? Where is this person? And that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So it's always there in your psychology.
Right.
Your world has to revolve around them in a sense. But at its core, your world still has to revolve around you. That's the secret. And your relationship is like that outer layer besides that. And so the big thing is just not losing track of myself and my wife and my relationship, because that makes everything else exponentially easier.
Oh, totally.
With the with management of the kids.
Yeah.
And so, really, and this is even the mission with this new project, it's really not that difficult when you are coming into it intentionally creating a culture that makes these things easier. And unfortunately, we have a larger culturescape that makes being healthy difficult. And matter of fact, it will fight you if you try to do something healthy. It's just this very strange paradox we're living in right now, because our ancestors would have just been active. They just would have eaten real food. Mm-hmm. They just would have slept out of just, if anything, danger of being out and about. When we're not nocturnal creatures, we can't see that lion, but it could see you. We would have been getting better sleep and all the things. There were different challenges, of course, but being, quote, fit was just normal. Mm. And today it's very different, as you know. And, the latest numbers from the CDC, and this was published in 2022, 6 out of 10 American adults have at least one chronic disease. 40% have 2 or more. And it's growing. And this has gone up precipitously just in the last couple of decades. Many conditions that were rare are now normal. And we even had to change adult onset diabetes, type 2 diabetes, the name of it, to type 2 diabetes, because it used to be relegated to adults. But now a lot of kids, that trend has gone up. And there was a paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is one of our top tier medical journals. It's effectively called 200 Years of Diabetes. And it looked back at the last 200 years, last couple centuries of diabetes. And the numbers were relatively stable for well over 100 years. But about 40 years ago, something happened, 40, 50 years ago. And in that 40-year time span, the rates of type 2 diabetes quadrupled, right? And so now it's one of those things where we have today 130 million Americans have type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. And this isn't me just spouting this out. This is
it's real.
NIH, CDC numbers, looking at the trends of chronic disease in our culture. And it's not okay. It's not normal. And what is diabetes at its core? And this is one of the things, because it can seem this kind of like very strange aura, like diabetes, there's something with insulin and, whatever. We don't really know what it is. Mm-hmm. Most people. And what type 2 diabetes is, it's an adaptation. A lot of disease labels are alterations in our biology, making our genes, our genetic blueprint. And, one of my mentors is Dr. Bruce Lipton, cell biologist, and he's really the person who pushed epigenetics into popular culture. Mm. And he shared with me years ago that based on epigenetic influences, so your environment, internal and external, by the way, all right, because he always kept bringing me back to mind and how your thoughts alter the chemistry in your body and change how your genes are getting expressed. And he shared with me that, because in my university biology class, I was taught DNA to RNA to protein, right? So the copies that are getting printed out of us, as I'm seeing you, I'm seeing the proteins, and same thing with me. And some minerals, of course, are thrown in the mix here. But basically, he shared that one epigenetic change can have a gene read out or print out 3,000 different proteins from one gene based on different exposures. And my passion is nutrigenomics, nutrigenetics, how food impacts our genetic expression. But when it comes to type 2 diabetes, what is happening, what we call a disease, is your body trying to adapt under unideal circumstances to keep you alive.
Right.
With that insane or very rampant amount of glucose exposure that we never experienced as a species for hundreds of thousands of years, kind of in this model. And suddenly we've got Mountain Dew Red and Doritos and Pop-Tarts. And it's like all of this glucose exposure. And our bodies, because all of that glucose in our bloodstream will kill us. It will break stuff down very, very quickly, whether it's our brain cells, and we're seeing insulin resistance in the brain. And Alzheimer's disease is being called type 3 diabetes because of the damage that happens to our brain cells. But downstream, if we're looking at, again, type 2 diabetes in of itself, and this is the last part with this, and it's so fascinating, with all that glucose exposure, what happens is we have what's called insulin resistance. It's kind of like, I think about like email, right? We get a bunch of a certain message coming in from this one source, and it will start to go to spam.
Right.
Right. It's like junk mail. So the resistance, there's a resistance in that message getting to the cell when it comes to insulin. And the most insulin sensitive sites in our body is really our muscle cells. Right. And so this is also part of our conversation, is like the importance of muscle, building and maintaining muscle. But in particular, we think about insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes in terms of fat, in particular, belly fat, visceral fat accumulation, which that is a big part of it. But just to keep us protected and alive, our body makes this adaptation. And it finds another way to deal with all of that glucose that's in your bloodstream that can break down your capillaries, lead to blindness, loss of limbs, all these terrible things. It's doing what it can to subdue this event, to slow it down. But what is happening, in essence, I mentioned this is an adaptation, but type 2 diabetes is really at its core, it's an accelerated aging disease. And so what a fun way to start this conversation off.
I know, right? But very important. And there are so many elements of things that are important to dive into within this. And in the middle of that, you mentioned your specific kind of niche that you like to dive into, and say the name of it again. Nutrigenomics and nutrigenomics. And I am so curious how you have gotten from where you started in day one in your very first hour to where you are now in that kind of interest in all of these things, in the books that you've written and the #1 health podcast that you have. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Pretty incredible to see where you started, where you are now, and how you really got into all of these situations, because these deep dive topics are so important. And I think there's a lot of misinformation. I think there's a lot of fear. I think there's a lot of just people are trying to figure it out. Sometimes people just don't know how to get to where they want to be in a way that allows them to have incredible quality of life. And I think that you have some really unique thoughts and opinions, well backed by research. I have sent you many a voice memo before asking your opinion on different topics, because I trust you and I trust that you are deep in the research, and also you have a really cool lens of reality in understanding that we're all human beings, and these things have to be sustainable. We have to have quality of life. And if things become too strict and rigid and unattainable, then it's not going to lead to quality of life in our body and our mind. So thank you for being here on the first hour, Shawn. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Oh man, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Yes.
You know, that first hour, I love that framing so much. And I think, you know, even in when you said that you trust me, you know, I felt that. And for me, our life experience is qualifying us to do certain things. It's not just, you know, our school education and our conventional university education, all those things. And I'm the first person in my family to go to college, let alone graduate. You know, I didn't come from a community or a culture where that was something that was even really seen as possible. It's just not something that anybody that I knew had ever done before. And, you know, being that, and I just want to make this point as well. The first time that my show was the #1 health podcast in the United States, that doesn't make sense. All right. I lived in Ferguson, Florissant, Missouri. All right. So I was like living in the quote, nice part of Ferguson and Florissant. And I had just moved from the bad part, the quote, bad part of Ferguson. And I'm saying that because this is one of those very notable food deserts in the United States. And this new label that's been crafted, but I don't like it because it still sounds a little exotic. Food desert, you know. It's not that kind of desert where, you know, you got camels and sand in a music video or Backstreet Boys or something like that.
We're still in Missouri.
Yes, we're in Missouri. And what it really means is that we're just absolutely surrounded and inundated with ultra processed foods and a lack of access to real food. And I think it's an important distinction for everybody with ultra processed foods. It's a newer term, but ultra processed foods have been around for a couple of decades now, a few decades. And humans have been processing foods for thousands upon thousands of years, whether it's cooking a steak, baking a sweet potato, cooking some rice, whatever the case might be, that is processing the food. And even things like taking tomatoes and spices and making tomato sauce or pasta sauce or pressing the oil out of olives or coconuts, like that's a process, but that's minimally processed. You can still tell where the food came from. All right. It's just a step or two away from that. It still has the essence of something real. And humans have been interacting with it for centuries. And our genes have been able to really interact in a way that has been health affirming, to put it simply. Ultra processed foods, on the other hand, this is when you have a field of corn. And I'm from the Midwest, so I've seen many fields of corn. And somehow, some way, that field of corn becomes a bowl of Lucky Charms. That field of corn becomes a bag of Funyuns or Doritos, or, you know, a field of wheat somehow, some way becomes Pop-Tarts or Eggos. Like, if you were to present some Eggos to somebody my wife is from Kenya, for example, there's different tribes, someone in the Maasai tribe, and you give them an Eggo and ask, hey, where is this from? They're going to be dumbfounded. There's no evidence that comes from anything on earth. It is so denatured, so far removed, all of these very intensive processing in and of itself. But now we talk about all the synthetic ingredients and additives and sugars and artificial colors and flavors and preservatives and all these different things that we never interacted with as a species. Many of these compounds, and this is just, it is what it is. We've got a whole list with the WHO, by the way, are known carcinogens, cancer-causing agents, obesogens, obesity-causing agents, above caloric control, altering your metabolism in a way that makes you gain fat faster. All right. And I'll just throw one more in here because being that I'm from St. Louis, Monsanto's home base was there, and they would be at the job fairs, and I wanted to work there. You know, it was like one of my top jobs that I wanted to, you know, get when I graduated. And Monsanto has come under a lot of scrutiny recently for glyphosate, Roundup. And the WHO has denoted glyphosate is a group 2A carcinogen. That means that it probably causes cancer in humans. And you would think, okay, well, maybe it's just not that prevalent. That's okay. Well, the Environmental Working Group, and I shared this also in the Eat Smarter Family Cookbook, by the way. The Environmental Working Group did a big analysis of popular products on U.S. store shelves, grain products. They found that 80 to 90% of conventional grain products are contaminated with glyphosate, this probable human carcinogen. So we're just inundated with this stuff and wondering why it's so hard to be healthy. And so I didn't know any of this stuff. And being from Missouri and being able to craft a show that eventually becomes the #1 health podcast in the country is crazy, because this is not like a hub of advantage or, you know, cooperation and support and all those things. And I'm saying this to say that it doesn't matter where you are right now or where you come from, what you've been through. You have so much power to create something special. And I'm, a lot of people say this like, if I could do it, anybody could do it. No, like for real. When it comes to me, straight up, like if I could do this, come on. And so, I'm very grateful to have this conversation, to talk about that and what kind of led into all this stuff. And yeah.
That's incredible. What got you interested in health?
There's a distinction too between health and fitness.
Yeah.
I was always into fitness.
Okay.
I was a neighborhood legend, with
Absolutely.
Sports and all that thing.
What'd you play?
Everything. I mean, for hours and hours hooping. And, I remember, like we would spend a lot of time just like at the, one of the local basketball courts, just trying to touch the rim and dunk, and, just playing hours and hours of basketball, football, and eventually, going to high school. I went to the number 2 school in the state and for academics, but also athletics as well. Big baseball school, a lot of pro baseball players come out of there, football players. And I was like that. I was that fast guy, I was the fastest kid in the school in my age group. And each, as we went up each step, I ran a 4.5 40 during my freshman summer, the summer before my sophomore year. And everything was looking good. Everything was looking really good. But once that season ended, that sophomore season and track started, I was doing a time trial with my coach, a 200-meter sprint. And as I was coming off the curve into the straightaway, I didn't know this at the time, but I came up limping because my hip broke.
Oh my gosh.
All right. I broke my hip. There was no fall. There was no trauma. My hip broke.
Wow.
And when I actually came to practice a couple more days after, and I couldn't really run. I couldn't get my leg to fire. And so the coach made me go get checked out. And I got an x-ray done, and, the physician put it up and he's like, oh, that's the problem. Your iliac crest is broken. And there's like a piece of my hip was just floating off in space.
Oh my gosh.
And he was like, oh, okay, well, we'll get you patched up. And what I experienced was something called standard of care. I was given some crutches. I was given some NSAIDs, some non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, or, just like you could take some over the counter, some Advil or something like that. And what was interesting though at the time that I don't talk about often is he also gave me ultrasound therapy, which was interesting and kind of innovative. And if you think about that, it's sound used as a treatment. And now we've got a huge database of studies on how sound can, break down cancer cells, kidney stones, accelerate healing, reduce inflammation, but also give us feedback, like an ultrasound for pregnancy, for example, and to be able to have images, right, based on sound and this kind of resonance and conductivity with sound in the human body. So I just want to plant that seed on how science and our world is so much more magnificent than we give it credit for,
right.
And we tend to get caught in this tunnel vision, which it was interesting that he applied that, but outside of that, it was still, standard of care,
right.
Namely because he didn't ask the question, how can a kid break his hip?
That's what I was wondering. How does that even happen if there's not any sort of impact or anything like that?
And that question, I didn't get the answer to for years, because no one was asking it. And at the age of 20, by the way, after that break, I just couldn't stay healthy.
Yeah.
My junior year, I've got game films at my house that it's crazy. It's kind of like my son now. He's at a different level than his peers. He's notably faster. He's just moving at a different pace.
Sure.
And you see me on these game films, just it looks like I'm playing with kids. I am a kid,
sure,
but it looks like I'm playing with kids because I'm just faster. But there's 2 times in my junior year that you can see me get injured and nobody touched me. One time I was running, it was either 38 or 39 sweep, and I got past the line, the linebackers, the defensive back was 5 yards behind me trying to run me down.
Yeah. And
I'm 5 to 10 yards from the end zone, and I just fall because I torn my hamstring or, in this course, it's all connected to my hip and my, and I just couldn't stay healthy and my aspirations were vanquished essentially. And that was kind of my way out, my perception, because in my environment, That's what people, if anybody was going to potentially go to college, not any of my peers that I knew, but I saw a lot of people that looked like me through music or through athletics was like, that's the way that you do it.
Right.
And but fortunately, I was always, a great student. And I thank my grandmother for that. And I was a scholar athlete, a 3.8 GPA. And I honestly didn't really try that hard.
It's incredible.
To be honest. But because I figured something out, which is like that education is a system. There's just certain things that are required of you. You just do those things. It's not that complicated. Now, within that, of course, there is different ways that we learn, and I love this sentiment that's attributed to Einstein, but it's not necessarily how smart you are. It's how you are smart. And some people are brilliant when it comes to maybe understanding music and art or language, but they might suck at putting these equations together in math, and they're led to believe like you're stupid.
Right.
You can't succeed because you're not good at this one subject, and you get held back. And it's so silly because we suppress or ignore genius. I believe everybody has some kind of a genius if we pay attention to it. I think we just come packaged with that. And again, we have this rote standard of care when it comes to our kids and education. Right. There are different communities popping up, different school systems and things like that are paying more attention to the child, but it's not the norm at all right now. And but to circle back to how I got into this field, when I graduated, because of television, it's because of the Cosby Show.
Yes.
Which, damn, Bill. It's because of the Cosby Show. I saw people who looked like me, who were successful and happy, right? And at my house, we didn't know what success or happiness really looked like. It was a lot of drama. There's a lot of violence inside the household, a lot of disease and dysfunction, alcoholism, drug abuse. My stepfather actually just passed away right before this book came out. Oh, and he was there in my life since I was about 9 months old. So he's all I ever knew as a father figure. And he'd been in assisted living for about 15 years almost because of drugs and brain damage from that. We grew up in the inner city during the crack epidemic. And so I had a lot of family members who were lost to that, whether it's like jail or death or damage. And it's so strange because it was just normalized to me, But thankfully I had this. Sometimes our environment can also be, we are a product of our environment. You hear the sentiment, but we're also creators of our environment.
Yeah.
That's what makes us special as humans. We have all this capacity to create new environments, but sometimes it's contrast is giving you opportunity for, right? And so I get to see exactly what I don't want and what I'm not going to do. And it's tough if you don't know what you're going to do. And so that'll lead to a lot of like trial and error trying to figure things out. And that's really what my college experience was, because I didn't know anybody that graduated from college except maybe my teachers.
Sure.
And because of the Cosby Show and Bill's character was a doctor, and his wife was a lawyer. And, seeing the happy family and, Theo and, Claire Huxtable and Rudy and this family dynamic, I wanted that. I wanted a happy family. And because of that example, I decided I went to this private university in St. Charles, Missouri, and they had a great pre-med program. But here's the problem. I hated science. I hated it.
That's so interesting because you're so science driven now.
Yes, it's crazy.
Yeah.
That's going back to that sentiment of life qualifies you
right.
for the thing that you do if you're paying attention. So I did my first semester there, and it was an elective, by the way. I took nutritional science.
Okay.
You didn't have to take that. I took nutritional science because I thought it had to do with fitness.
Gotcha.
Right. I thought this was going to help me to be more fit and like perform better and walk on the football team and, all that kind of stuff. But I was, wow, the education from that really messed me up, just my thinking, because it was science that was funded by General Mills. Like they're a contributor to our nutrition program, right? So, and this is a hallmark company of ultra processed foods. And, the first day of class, the professor said, weight loss is very simple. From the perspective of science, all you have to do is expend more calories than you take in. Or if you gain weight, you consume more calories than you're expending or burning. And maintenance is, they're equal. And that's that. And that's not that, because he was notably overweight. A really smart guy, but something wasn't adding up for him, because I know if he could choose, he would not be in that situation that he's in. And that's what kind of the basis of this was food pyramid time.
Yes.
The basis of that food pyramid is 7 to 11 servings of what he called healthy whole grains. So very sugar dominant foods are the basis of the diet. Mm-hmm. And little did I know, again, I was getting miseducated in a way, but I still had that experience. Big auditorium classroom, these lectures, a lot of science that was just not applicable to the real world. And this ties back to what you said about me. Being real is one of my, I can't help it. All right. This has to be something that is practical and based on reality. Mm-hmm. I love all the different hypotheses and different perspectives and exploration of science. But what about right here, right now? What matters? And the truth is, it's going to be different for different people at different times. There isn't one cookie cutter way that things are supposed to be, period. But anyways, to put the icing on the cake of this story, the first semester went by, I hated science, and I got out of it. So I shifted over to the business school. And that was based on another television experience. It was from the movie Boomerang with Eddie Murphy. Okay. And he was in marketing and just seemed so sexy and cool. And I'm just I'll do that. So literally my choices were based on television programming. But shortly thereafter, I get diagnosed with this condition, and it goes back to explaining why I broke my hip at track practice. I had an advanced aging disease. I had degenerative disc disease. So my spine was deteriorating, and my bone density was dramatically lower than my peers in my age group. My bone density was that of somebody who was 70, 80, 90 years old.
Oh my gosh.
And this is coming from my physician at the time. Once I get this diagnosis, he puts the MRI up for me to see. And I'm just dumbfounded that he's looking at my spine when my leg was what brought me in. I was having leg pain. And he said, and I was like, okay, so what's going on? And he's like, well, son, you have degenerative disc disease, and this is what's causing your pain. And he showed me I had 2 severely degenerated discs, my L4, L5, S1, those are the lower disc, and they were herniated as well. So they were herniated and on the sciatic nerve, and they were black because they were so degenerated. And I'm 20 when I got this diagnosis. And what's so crazy is that when people see that, and even whether it's a heart attack, a stroke, the onset, where you officially get the diagnosis of diabetes or Alzheimer's, those are years or decades in the making. I didn't just suddenly have degenerative disc disease. That was years upon years in the making. My body just falling apart, and it was happening before my eyes. I couldn't stay healthy physically. My body just kept breaking. And so I asked him, okay, so what do we do to fix this? Let's go, And he said, he did his hands like this, slow down, son. I'm sorry, but this is incurable. And son, you have the spine of an 80-year-old man. And this is something that, unfortunately, you're just going to have to live with. And we're going to help you to manage this. We're going to get you some medication. We can look at you for back surgery in a couple of years. You're still really young. But I'm sorry, son, this is something you're just going to have to live with. And my optimistic mind was like, all right, so I just asked another question, which for years I didn't think I had any grounds to ask this question. Yeah. But then I realized I was in that nutritional science class a couple of years before. And I asked him, does this have anything to do with what I'm eating? Should I change the way I'm exercising? And he looked at me like, you idiot. He looked at me like I was from another planet. Like, you're so strange. Like, he said this has nothing to do with what you're eating. This is something that just happens. And I'm sorry that it happened to you. Again, we're going to get you some medication, help you deal with this pain. But, I'm sorry, son. That's all we can do. And that's when the deflated feeling started to like kick on. It's just like I got poked and the air is just starting to leave the room and leave my body. And I left there. I came in with a nuisance of a pain, and within about a week's time, the pain became unbearable because my mind had been infected. And this is it's called a nocebo effect. Placebo effect, a lot of people hear about.
Sure.
But what people don't realize is that in clinical trials, we have to account for the placebo because it works.
Right.
Pretty much every trial, somebody believing that they're getting a treatment, they'll have the therapeutic response. And so across the board, on average, in clinical trials, placebos are around 30% effective, 33% effective. So somebody believing that this medication is going to lower my blood pressure, normalize my blood sugar, break down this cancer tumor. We have evidence on this, many studies, reverse my anxiety. There's so many trials where this has been done, sham surgeries, or where, today you can put a video up and watch your own knee surgery, for example.
No, thank you, but that's interesting.
I know, right? But they'll, put up somebody else's surgery, sure, or, cut the patient open, but not do any therapeutic change. But then believing that they got the surgery, their meniscus repairing or ACL, whatever the case is. We've got data on all this stuff, the power of the mind. And so for some conditions, the placebo effect is even stronger, in particular with mental health conditions. Sure. This can be upwards of 80% effective for depression. And it's the belief in the thing. A nocebo effect, however, is when you get a negative injunction or a negative message that something bad is going to happen, right? You are never going to walk again. You have 3 months to live. This condition is incurable, and you're going to be in pain the rest of your life. That was my message. And so I didn't realize this, but every cell in my body, I took that belief on. And so I went from, again, a nuisance of a pain to I was so scared. After about 2 weeks' time, I was scared to stand up because the pain was so bad. I just sat as much as I humanly could. And I dealt with that for the next couple of years. I was on a slew of different medications, different drugs to help me sleep at night too, because one of the medications he gave me had the side effect of restless leg syndrome, which didn't have its own unique pill at the time. So my legs felt like they were trying to leave me at night.
Oh my gosh.
And that was Celebrex was the drug that he put me on. And yeah, it was just a huge struggle. But the reason that I'm in this field today is that after 2 years and seeking out multiple perspectives as well, which I encourage people to do, get a second opinion, get a third opinion. Okay. But every physician said the same thing. I'm sorry, this is incurable. You have degenerative disc disease and this is incurable. There's nothing you can do about it. And everything changed when I decided to stop blaming the doctors, asking why me 24/7. It was just going on in my head. Why me? Why is this happening to me? And I decided to do something to feel better. It was literally that simple. I decided. But when you actually decide something, there was no other possibility for me. It's like, I'm going to find a way to feel better. Mm-hmm. And it started with something small, just like, what can I do to feel better? And my low-hanging fruit was activity.
Right.
Every doctor I left with another prescription and another note for my job so I don't have to work. And they would put me on light activity. And I would be living out the rest of my life, because 22 is when I made the decision, the rest of my life with minimal activity. And nobody would have thought twice about it. You would never know my name. You'd never know who I am. Since that moment of decision, and the crazy thing was the solutions were there the whole time. I just wasn't attuned to them because I was so locked into the woe is me. I just watched Wednesday, by the way. Whoa.
Oh, yes.
woe is me. And rightfully so. I've been through a lot. And he gave me permission basically to stop fighting. And it was a fight. But I felt like, because of my grandmother, so grateful for her, just like she believed in me. I just had this feeling that I was going to do something special as well. And a friend of mine who I'd known for years, hung out with her a lot. this is the first time I was just riding with her, and she pulls up at Wild Oats, which is since been bought up by Whole Foods. They're like kind of like a mom and pop type of Whole Foods. I didn't know this existed.
Yeah.
I drove past this place.
And this is in Missouri?
Hundreds of times, literally. Yeah, in Missouri. And by the way, at this time, there was one Whole Foods in all of St. Louis. And it's a major city. It's a huge city. And one Wild Oats. And now I'm like seeing all these different, like, what is all this stuff? All this like organic, what is organic food? And all these different supplements and books. And I have one of those books on my shelf from that Wild Oats still to this day. It was a nutritional prescription book. Basically, if whatever your condition was, you look it up and there's all these scientific studies affirming like how to address this with food or with nutrition. And I looked up my condition, degenerative disc disease, and it was noting different studies on calcium deficiency. And I was like, I'm drinking milk all the time. But it noted that calcium is required for clotting your blood, amongst other things. And there's like a hierarchy with your body. If you're not bringing in enough bioavailable calcium, your body will leach it from your spine and your hips first.
Wow.
Yeah, those are my two. That's when I was like, holy shit, what? But now I'm trying to do the math. I'm like, I'm guzzling milk. Like, that's my jam.
Right.
But this pasteurized, homogenized, factory farmed, in this Eat Smarter Family Cookbook, I make note of, a video people could check out with a common practice, cows getting fed all this leftover like Halloween candy and shit like that, wrappers and all, in this big vat, along with, the synthetic nutrients and antibiotics. But the antibiotics are not to keep the cows from getting an infection. Most of the data is pointing to, and this is what's done in the industry, it helps them to gain weight faster because of the detriment to their microbiome. All right. So from these sick that's a whole different thing as far as the calcium and the bioavailability, but also my biology might be unique in that I'm not really getting what I need as far as calcium from that source. And so I set out to, by the way, calcium wasn't even absorbable without these other things. And it's just like, I found about like 20 other things that I was not getting on my drive-through diet at the time. And this is the final point of this. I was making my tissues out of very, very low quality things. 90% of my diet, this is not an exaggeration, was ultra processed foods. 90% every single day of my life, every day. And I'm saying this is not abnormal either, because in the Eat Smarter Family Cookbook, I share for the first time, a major book has published this new study, published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. They looked at consumption of ultra processed foods by children in the United States, age 2 to 19. So children and adolescents. And they found that in 2018, the average child's diet was already 61% ultra processed foods, fake ass foods. And by 2018, that number was almost 70% of our children's diet in the United States is ultra processed foods. And if you know anything about research, there's going to be people on each end. That's average, is almost 70%.
Wow.
There's going to be people who was 20. There's going to be people who are 90.
Sure.
I was 90. And so I'm literally your body cannot do certain processes. Just even one nutrient, magnesium, is responsible for over 650 biochemical processes that we're aware of. That means your body can't do these processes without magnesium being present. Or it will have to make it an adaptation, which is probably going to lead to loss of function. Even in my university level science classes, I was never taught this because there was a break in the education between what we're learning and what's applicable to you as a person in the real world. And so we were taught about the mitochondria and ATP and the energy currency of the body. People talk about that stuff. That's not an active version of that energy until it's bound with magnesium. It's ATP connected, Mg, ATP. That's the usable energy currency of the body. All right. That's how important it is. I'm ridiculously deficient in magnesium. Of course, I'm deficient in almost everything.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference between synthetic versions and whole food versions. And I shared a ton of different studies on that in the book as well. It isn't just hearsay or guessing, like it's true. And so realizing this, and now I'm bringing in all these phytonutrients that my body had been starving for all these years. And when I tell you I got better so quickly, like 6 weeks after that moment of revelation, The pain I was in for 2 years was completely gone.
Wow.
And I'd lost at this point for 2 years and like not doing anything and eating the drive-through diet, I'd gained a lot of weight. I was close to 200 pounds.
Sure.
And I'd lost about 16 pounds in that 6 weeks. And I just felt like, and people saw me at the university, you know, still in school, thankfully. I was barely hanging on, but people started coming up to me, you know, after a couple of months, they're just like, what did you do? Because I didn't look like a person who just lost weight. Like I looked like a person who was radiantly healthy. So
what did you do? So you're going from 90% highly processed foods. How did you make these switches? Was it kind of a huge 180 into only specific things, or what did it look like?
Yeah. My first hour was Slim Fast first.
Okay.
Yeah. Because of marketing. I didn't know shit about nutrition.
Yeah.
I took a university nutritional science class.
Yes.
And the marketing from television is telling me, and it seemed very logical, this has all the nutrients that you need, a shake for breakfast, one for lunch, and a sensible dinner. First of all, that was suffering. But we are led to believe that you have to suffer in order to be healthy. And so as I'm fucking starving throughout the day, I'm just like, okay, I'm losing weight. I must be losing weight. I'm starving.
Isn't that such an interesting concept that sometimes when people feel like they are suffering or they are hungry, that somehow equates to them doing something good for themselves as far as losing weight or getting healthy or whatever that is. I don't know what that psychology is specifically, but in a lot of people that I've worked with, that seems to be a correlation.
Yeah. It's the culture. We have an unhealthy culture as far as our connection to food. And we're taught to believe that in order for you to be healthy, restriction, deprivation, suffering, enjoyment is going to be a far side dish, maybe a little dessert later, you know, and I'm talking about metaphorically.
Yes.
All right. So enjoyment is not your modus operandi. And so it's very illogical though, because humans, we are driven to rebel against anything that is putting us into a box. We do not like to be told what to do. And we have a very complex flavor palette. And also, it's another fascinating thing, like the human nose is one of the things that's really special in the animal kingdom too, because we're not like able to sniff out, you know, I don't know, like who's got cocaine at the airport.
Yeah.
We don't have that kind of a nose where these, you know, dogs do. But our ability to understand flavor has a lot to do with our sense of smell. This is why if somebody has a cold or something like that, your food tastes super weird because that integration. And also sound has a lot to do with our enjoyment of food. And there's actually a Nobel Prize one. It's called the Sonic Chip Experiment. And it was an Ig Nobel Prize. It's kind of like Nobel Prize is awarded, and this is conducted by the Nobel Prize Committee, awarded to things that as they say, that'll make you laugh, but also make you think. And the scientists had test subjects to consume a uniform food and something that has the same density, and they're pretty much the same, every one of them, which was Pringles. And they put the headphones on them and they amplified certain aspects of the crunch. And they found that when the crunch was put in a certain frequency, the test subjects believed that the food tasted better. It was 15% fresher and tastier based on the sound. And this is because through our evolution, even if you come across some apples, right? The crunchiness of that apple is an indicator of its freshness. If an apple you bite into and it's soft, that's like, it's immediate, like, oh, that's probably not good, right? And so there's something with crunch, with sound, with flavor, with smell, and all those things integrate into our desire to seek tasty things. All right. All animals, if you've ever thought about this, why do these sheep go and eat those things? Why do lions eat that? Why? Everything is going after something that tastes good to it.
Right.
But we villainize in our culture, like the fact that we like to eat things that taste good. And on the other, we have to be honest though, food scientists have manipulated our desire to eat tasty things. Absolutely.
100%.
That's where the situation gets sticky. But our desire to eat things that taste good is not the problem. And to ignore that, and I know like some of my colleagues are like, the food is fuel and, you know, eat to live, don't live to eat. I respect that, but that's not reality. That even just based on biology, we have a certain ability to taste flavors to drive us to eat those flavors.
Yes.
And so if I could share this one quick thing, last thing, there's this phenomenon, it's called post-ingestive feedback. And basically through our evolution, if we're in natural conditions, we'll just say we come across some apples, right? Some crab apples, or, we come across some berries. We would eat those berries and we'd get all these different nutrients. Maybe it's like a little bit of selenium, some copper, some vitamin C, this few amino acids over here, and our cells are taking stock, essentially cellular memory, writing notes on, okay, I got this particular nutrient, these nutrients from this flavor. And if we develop a deficiency in those nutrients or run low on those nutrients, we would develop a craving to go and seek out that flavor.
So cool.
All right. And there's been many studies affirming this as well. Animal and human studies, that we seek out different foods based on the flavor, based on our cells' needs. With that being said, one of the inventions recently was a gas chromatograph, where scientists were able to identify the chemistry that makes certain flavors. So we can create the chemistry, the formula that makes that strawberry flavor. And now we can add that strawberry flavor to things that are not strawberries. We can add it to ice cream, no strawberries necessary, soda. We can add it to Pop-Tarts. And it doesn't have to taste exactly like a strawberry, but it's just enough to muddy up that communication. And so now we have very devolved sensing mechanisms on what we need to be eating, what flavors we should be seeking out. Not to mention the hyperpalatable aspects of these foods designed, technologies like Bliss Point, like vanishing caloric density, and really manipulating our biology to make us want to eat these ultra-processed foods. And so, so that's a really fascinating thing. And last, really, really quick thing, just to summarize, what did I do? The first thing that I did after Slim Fast, which lasted about a week, I did lose 2 pounds. But by the end of the week, I'd pretty much gained it back. But the next thing was I ended up with my friend at Wild Oats. All right. So within that, because my perspective was different, I was trying and I'm looking at things differently. And with that experience with her and Wild Oats and me finding out about all these nutrients, I became a natural pill popper. So now I was like, okay, these nutrients, let me get all these supplements.
Right.
And that I felt better. Things were happening, but it was mad expensive. And I was living in Ferguson, Missouri, and college and all the things. And it's just like, was not feasible. And also, thankfully, I came across some other data on how much food mattered, and what I did was now I start to look for what foods have these concentrations of these nutrients. And a lot of these foods I wasn't necessarily eating before, which helped with me blending. A blender came in handy. And eventually, I used a juicer for a while. But the big thing was simply upgrading. This is the big secret. That shouldn't be a secret. I upgraded the things that I was eating. Rather than going to McDonald's and getting, 2 for 99-cent cheeseburgers and fries, I was going to Whole Foods and taking a calculated risk, investing in myself because it did cost more, getting grass-fed beef, like a sprouted grain bun or something like that. And if I did want fries, I was getting like these organic oven fries, but I would have a side of vegetables, like whatever veggie I would eat, because I didn't eat a salad yet. In my entire life, I had never had a salad still. I didn't eat a salad till I was 25, by the way. But I would eat broccoli. Broccoli was cool. I could do some green beans and, fruit as well. So I just started to make my sides more like real, very minimally processed foods. And now again, I'm getting these nutrients in, these nutrient inputs. Man, I got better so fast. And some key supplements I was still taking as well.
Right.
One of those essential ones was omega-3s. That was huge. Because one of those studies found that omega-3s, and I actually shared a new study on omega-3s and bone density, specifically the hips and spine in the new Eat Smarter Family Cookbook. Because it's just like, I found out about this 20 years ago and it's still applicable. We need omega-3s for our bone density, not just for brain health,
right,
but for the health of our bones as well. So that was my process on like what I did as far as nutrition. And eventually because food is information as well. And it started to change my palate, what I was attracted to. And so now I'm like, I'm open and like desiring to eat these other foods that I wasn't eating before, and just sneaking some things in. But then all of a sudden, like I like the way that tastes. And with the fitness side, there was a study I came across on racehorses, and it found they was looking at bone density for these racehorses, which it's a $1 billion industry, by the way. And so they wanted to increase the bone density of the horses. They had a control group. They had a group they were giving these nutrients to, supplements, and those horses did improve their bone density. But another group of horses, they walked the horses and gave them supplements, and their bone density was even higher. So the exercise, I was like, I've got to do this. And so I spent about a week on the stationary bike. It was really hard to walk. So and then I did a week on the elliptical machine. But by this point, like a couple weeks into it, I'm feeling really good with my nutritional changes. And I started sleeping better on accident because of what you do during the day helps you sleep better at night. And, after that, I started walking around. There's an indoor track at the school. Then like week 3 or 4, I started like dabbling with a couple of weights, which was really my jam back in the day, just being an athlete. And again, by 6 weeks, it was as if nothing had ever happened to me. And 9 months later, I got a scan done, and my 2 herniated discs had retracted into place, and I regenerated the kind of the suppleness of my 2 lower discs, so much so that my spine looked a little bit advanced age. But by the age of 30, when I got a scan done, my spine was effectively, again, there's a chronological age and biological age. My spine looked younger than that of my peers in their 30s. And so, yeah, that's what's possible. It's really remarkable.
That is wild. And how cool too. I love that your first wave kind of dabbling into this and this curiosity of being able to kind of heal yourself in those senses. It wasn't 0 to 100.
Yeah.
It was, how can I upgrade the things that I already like and the things that I'm already eating? And I feel like that's such a breath of fresh air, especially in today's day and age, because you can hear some of these statistics that you've been talking about, and it can be a little bit alarming. Obviously, it is alarming, and people live in this fear, and there's a lot of fear mongering of people that will only spew these things and say, okay, well, food, like you were saying, some colleagues will have a rhetoric of food is only fuel, and if you're enjoying it, that's almost bad, right? So being able to think about, okay, yes, we need to understand these are the types of nutrients that our bodies need to function well, to heal ourselves, to be able to have this longevity. And also, how do we understand human psychology and what is accessible for people? And not everyone lives in Los Angeles and has all of these things accessible to them, or the opportunities to go to Erewhon and get these, delicious foods all the time. So how do we make these choices that can allow us to simply just upgrade in just the smallest ways? And then the curiosity. I don't like pickles right now. That's a very specific example to me. I used to not like fermented foods. And so I just kept trying it. And now I love it. And I eat it pretty much every day.
Yeah.
Right. And so in your cookbook, I've tried 2 recipes so far. The first one is the upgraded breakfast sandwich. And I love that that's the language that you use. I'm very specific on language around food and the importance of that to people's relationship with food. And you do such a good job of that. It's really nutritious ingredients, but it tastes so good. So that was one. And then the other one that I made was the sweet potato pancakes. Yeah. And I'm on a new chef era where I'm trying.
That's amazing.
And your food is delicious, but really accessible. And so I think that that's a really important thing that people need to know. They don't have to just go all out, and never enjoy a treat ever again. Yeah. Right? Do you feel that way?
Those 2 examples that you just mentioned, those were 2 of my favorite foods from McDonald's.
Yes.
That's where this came from, the upgraded breakfast sandwich. And I shared a story in there too. Each of the recipes has like a little bit
anecdote.
Of yeah. And I remember watching the movie Big Daddy with my daughter, who's my oldest. And we watched it a lot. Yeah. And there's a scene where he's like, okay, so because a kid peed in the bed or whatever, and he wouldn't go back to sleep because he laid down a bunch of newspaper for the kid to lay on because he had no business really having a kid. And he's like, okay, so since we're up, guess what? We got time to make it to McDonald's for breakfast. And he gets there and breakfast had just ended. He was ordering, but he realized that because it was almost 11 o'clock, it was like 10:58 or something. but breakfast ended at 10:30. And that's happened to me before because for some reason I thought it was 11.
Yes.
But making it to breakfast in time at McDonald's, I'd get the, sausage McMuffin.
I was a bacon, egg, and cheese person.
Bacon,
myself,
egg, and cheese on the McMuffin or the biscuit.
Yep.
Which one? The biscuit?
Oh,
or the
I'm a
McMuffin?
biscuit person
Okay,
for
yeah.
sure.
So then there's, of course, the English muffin version.
Yep.
There's the hotcakes and sausage, which the hotcakes, that was my jam. So just upgrading those things with real food ingredients. So now we're not using a very high glycemic flour base for pancake. We're using a very, very nutrient dense, complex sweet potato. And the anthocyanins, as I noted in the book as well, you get to learn over 40 of the most science-backed foods for improving your metabolic health, your memory, your sleep quality. And you get to see the studies there. One of the studies with the sweet potatoes looked at these anthocyanins essentially targeting the memory center of our brain and enhancing memory, which is like, what, really? And also the benefits for our gut health as well. And you'll see little emojis by each of the foods as well. So you don't have to even read the studies. You see by sweet potato, there's a muscle emoji for the metabolic health and brain emoji for, memory or cognitive function, and a little gut emoji. So, but now let's turn this into a delicious meal experience. And we also increase the protein fraction in there too. So it's not just like a high carb food. And not to villainize carbs though, but just looking at what the majority of people are going to be most responsive to and having some good glucose regulation. All right. Very good glucose variability. And, the same thing with the breakfast sandwich as well. Now, you mentioned something really important, which is the access. Like, how do we do this? What if you don't have the means? You're so right. People don't even know, man.
Yeah.
When you come out here to LA, it's nuts. I mentioned there was one Whole Foods. When I moved away from St. Louis, almost at the very end of 2019, there were 3 Whole Foods in St. Louis. St. Louis is a big city, okay? Big. Here, I'm talking, we could throw a rock out this window and we could hit a Whole Foods, But what I've learned, I thought this was a very health conscious city, but it's about the trend. It's about what's fashionable. Not a lot of these folks are really interested necessarily in the science. They do know, they might have some awareness of certain things might be better, but it's just like, it's a cool thing to do. And it's so accessible. And also if you have money, right? There's a certain vibe to it. And I get that. I was mistaken. I thought that coming here was like, oh, there's this sanctuary of health consciousness. It's not necessarily like that, because we have a huge problem here in California as well with metabolic health and with chronic disease. And it's not okay. Even the homeless population here in California, and this is recently published, the obesity rate in the United States prior to the pandemic was 42.5% of Americans were clinically obese. These are like, again, CDC, NIH. The homeless population in California is 38% obesity. How is that possible? Usually we have this perception of, if you don't have money, we have less access. We see more of a degradation. And according to the Lancet, which I shared in the book as well, did this huge meta-analysis, multiple nations. So there's over 100 countries they looked at, and they determined that poor diet is the #1 global risk to human health. More people are dying now from overconsumption of ultra-processed foods than from lack of food. We have this weird paradox that's taking place. So even if you don't have money, you could still be obese, but still be starving internally for nutrients. And so, I have a unique perspective on this because I come from that situation. I was at Whole Foods many times like, okay, I'm ready to put stuff back based on what the cashier is going to tell me. And sometimes I'm like risking buying this food versus like getting the money to pay my light bill. But so there's a couple of things here. Number one, there are ways to save money, which we'll talk about in just a second.
Yeah.
But more importantly than that is the investment in yourself. Because I really hope people get this. I can't even explain all of this seemingly, and I don't like to throw this word around a lot. I'm not talking about some David Blaine shit. I'm talking about magic, like beyond anything that we can understand on how powerful we are.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've loved studying for, almost 20 years now. Quantum physics is really that's where we're at.
Sure.
All right. And the observer effect and how, in the phantom DNA experiment and all these different things, these different experiments affirming how as humans, we affect the world around us with our focus, with our perception. We're so powerful. And so I'm saying all this to say that when I started taking those risks to invest in myself, I started feeling better. And I started to make more money, which enabled me to buy higher quality food. But not just that, that's not what changed. The biggest, most shocking change was I got to a place within a matter of years where a lot of food I didn't have to pay for anymore. Because now I'm an advocate, and now all these wonderful companies are just sending me food. I get seafood delivered, regenerative gathered seafood and regenerative, farming practices, whatever you want to name. I'm thinking about, I was not going to share this, but goji berries are one of those things that is pretty hot now.
Sure.
And I found out about goji berries maybe like 17 years ago, I want to say. And I was fascinated. I was like, what? And of course, they're not at any store around me.
Sure.
So I went to, in University City, there's a acupuncturist, and they had some goji berries there. And also I found out that the Tibetan School of Medicine, like you can order some, like I'm like spending money to try to get these berries I'd got fascinated with. And it had these really unique compounds. It's a complete protein in a berry, which is very unique.
Yeah.
And it had some evidence pointing to the potential of supporting human growth hormone production, all these like really cool things. But after doing that, and this is absolutely true story, I was speaking at like not a health necessarily event, but like it was like a holistic wellness event. So they had all kinds of people there, weird stuff and like kind of down to earth stuff too. And there was a table there for the top brand that had goji berries at the time. And the person who was running the table was like, their back was turned. They were like doing something. And somebody was like asking about one of their products. And they were like, I wonder what. And I was like, oh, this actually does this, this, and this. And, they da-da-da-da. And the person who was running the table heard me. And then after the person left, after they bought some and then they left, they were like, oh my God, you're amazing. And she was like, who are you? Where'd you come from? And I was like, oh, da-da-da. And she was in a relationship with the owner of the company.
Oh my gosh.
And so cut to within a month, they literally deliver a pallet of their products to my house in Ferguson, Florissant, Missouri. A truck had to come in with the forklift. I swear. Yeah, it's crazy. So not only are my needs met now because I was teaching nutrition classes. That's how I got there at that event. And now I have their products there because I use them and I love them. And now like I have it for free, right? That's the power of investing in yourself. That's going to come back to you in ways you might not ever understand. And that's why I want to encourage people to also cultivate. And if you can, and I'm actually today, when I leave here, I'm going to get a new journal because I stopped doing this. I stopped having a miracle journal to like keep track of those magical, just like things that blow you away that happen. And a lot of times they happen each day. It might be a small little thing. Somebody calls you that you were thinking about, or, a synchronicity. We just, even at the elevator just now walking in here, that was a whole thing. All right.
I didn't even hear what you guys were talking about. And so I'm so excited to learn about it. But isn't that wild how that can happen?
That is. You see, like these little, and it's something, he was talking about something that's been on my mind that I've been talking about with my wife. And it's just like, wow, okay, I got to pay attention to this, right? So to write down those things, because that attunes you to start paying attention to those seemingly miraculous, beautiful, unexplainable moments. And it like you start to then turn your frequency to that to pay more attention to it because it's always going on.
That's so important. We're moving so fast, trying to do everything that we don't pay attention to all of the things going around. We're paying attention to the things that we're frustrated with or that never seem to be going right. And we forget about these little amazing things that happen every day and can turn into big things if we're actually paying attention to what's happening.
Yeah. What's said is that what you focus on expands. Mm. What you focus on expands. And there are parts of our brain, there's this process in the brain called instinctive elaboration. We all have like a dominant question we're always asking that attunes us to certain things. This is why for those years when I was in pain, asking why me all the time, I was just finding data externally and internally to affirm why I wasn't helpable, why I wasn't getting well, why, my life was so bad and hard. But by shifting that dominant question to like, what can I do to feel better? And eventually, and I haven't shared this very often, but I created, and I encourage people to have an audacious, like crazy, amazing, bigger than what makes you comfortable, dominant question or goal. Mm-hmm. And so I start to ask, how can I be the healthiest person in the world? How can I be the healthiest person on earth? And it might not land us right there being that, but it'll put you in that territory, And so, we have the reticular cortex, reticular activating system, but basically we're going to be attuned to what you're focused on. If you're always focused on your problems and how messed up shit is and hard, you've got all these things to do. Yeah, you're just going to keep seeing more of that, and you're going to feel that in your body because your thoughts create chemistry in your body as well, instantaneously. And so part of being able to do this, though, because it sounds good, again, theory, I'm a big, practical, real person. Why is it so difficult to think the thoughts I want to think? Here's the bottom line truth. Our ancestors, close proximity ancestors, they had a lot of time in contemplation. They just did. We didn't have all this external stuff that we can put our attention to and lose ourselves. Social media and television and all these different things that are great, but we spend so much time outsourcing our thinking and absorbing that shit and mistake sometimes creativity for regurgitation because we're just processing all the shit that we're consuming. And a lot of us, we're consuming so much, we get kind of like a psychological constipation. Mm-hmm. Like we're not able to metabolize and eliminate and process our own thoughts, let alone all the other stuff we're taking in. For you to think the thoughts that you want to think, you have to take some time to just be. You have to unplug from all this stuff. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you haven't done this, it is hard at first. Because even if we're just a little bored, we pick up our phone. It's just like, it's always so right automatic. There. And so I would encourage people to set up some parameters and to know that within a short amount of time, you're going to feel better than you ever have. And I'm not talking about fasting per se from being on your phone, which that could be helpful, taking a week off or a month, something crazy, getting crazy, but just maybe 30 minutes a day where you just put your phone on silent and maybe just go for a walk without anything. Just go for a walk. Or, and this is hard to do, to just sit there and just let your thoughts come to you. Just think about stuff. Think about your thinking. Be able to get a peek at all the crazy shit going on in your head that's not getting your attention. It's like screaming at you like, hey, because what tends to happen when we unplug is stuff that we've forgotten about or that we wanted to do starts to bubble up. Mm-hmm. And so maybe you can keep a journal close by and like write those things down so you don't lose that thought again. Like, oh, damn, I meant to change the batteries in my, fire alarm.
Right.
All right. Not your vibrator. In your fire alarm.
I mean, whatever it is.
Whatever it
fine.
is. Forgot to change the batteries. And now you remember, you write it down. All right. And, but giving yourself that sacred time so you could be better, be your best self. And it's so much easier to think the thoughts you want to think because you have time to actually know yourself. That's like that. ancient statement, know thyself. Like, why do they put that at the opening of this temple? Know thyself, most important tenet. And the last piece here too, with the accessibility, just to circle back, I found out, little did I know, in Ferguson, Missouri, that whole freaking time there was a farmer's market. There's no gyms in Ferguson. There's no like organic section of the grocery store. I'm just, again, caught into, oh, this is a food desert and they're trying to kill us. I could go outside my environment, which was like a 30, 40-minute drive to get to Whole Foods. I can go into Whole Foods and buy based on what is on sale. That's what I would do as well. Stock up on the things that were a little bit less expensive. But then I find out that there's this farmer's market that was there in the, quote, good part of Ferguson this whole time.
Wow.
And now I'm going to the farmer's market. I'm saving sometimes half. It costs half the amount I'm paying at Whole Foods. And I'm meeting the farmers. The food is fresher, so it's going to be more nourishing. The nutrient density is higher. It's just like it all started to feed into itself. And then I start to make it an event where each week I would go with my family, right? And so now it's becoming a part of our culture. And now I find out, wait a minute, there are farmers markets all over St. Louis on different days. Like some of these farmers markets, they're doing yoga. What the fuck is yoga?
Right.
Like, it's like all this stuff that I'm starting to get attuned to. And I'm saving money now. I'm having more enriching experiences. And my kids are growing up in this now. And, there's CSAs as well, where you get deliveries. You can't necessarily, pick what you're getting, but you're getting like a box of different produce and things like that. There are so many companies that are stepping up and making things like, if people are eating, grass-fed meats and, as I mentioned, seafood, that are oftentimes significantly less than what you're going to pay at, not to villainize Whole Foods, by the way, but it can be expensive.
Sure.
But you're going to pay less. The food is going to be fresher. Sometimes, and this is where things are going right now, these companies are already doing things that Whole Foods is going to be pointed to because they're just going to adjust to the market and do what the people are demanding. But regenerative farming practices, and the same thing with our seafood as well. We have to do something because it's not good. Regenerative beekeeping as well. There's companies that are doing that. And so you can have that stuff delivered right to your door, and save tremendous amounts of money. So there's so many ways to go about this, but the problem oftentimes is that if you don't know, you don't know.
Totally. And it's a challenge too, because then people start learning about all of these different things, maybe are experiencing just curiosity. Maybe they feel fearful that they're going to be eating the wrong things, whatever it is. Sometimes I think people might be focusing on the wrong things when they're diving into that. And just because there's so much information out there, seemingly contradicting information about certain diets and approaches, and should you be keto? Should you be vegan? Should you be fasting? Should you be eating 6 meals a day? All of these different things. And so sometimes people want to focus on the right things. They're trying to do the best thing for themselves, but they get down this rabbit hole of these different approaches. How would you tell people to navigate that?
This is the biggest question of our current time right now. Because I've never met somebody. I had my own office working as a nutritionist for 10 years. I never met one person that didn't want to be healthy. And, there are people that might say, you're not going to live forever. Let's just, do whatever you want. If they can choose, they would still have their health and fitness and eat, the deep fried Twinkie as well, but we do have stories as to why, we might feel that it's too expensive, it's too hard, we don't deserve it. There's different reasons we might develop learned helplessness of trying so many different things. But everybody wants to be healthy. And when we do that, we tend to buy into a framework of some sort. And these frameworks can be very valuable, but they can also imprison you because it does come with its own set of boundaries and rules. And I'm so grateful for this and that experience working as a practitioner. And because I made the mistake that most practitioners make, and many of them never change, I was having people do what I thought was best for me.
Mm.
So if I'm into raw foods, guess what diet I'm going to have you do? If I'm into a vegan diet, that's what you're going to do. If I'm into keto, that's what you're going to do. If I'm into paleo, that's the best diet. That's what I do. And the truth is, many of these diets, and this is at its core, are going to be moving people away from ultra processed foods if they're doing it with some level of efficacy.
Right.
All right. And so you're going to probably feel better on all of these different things. And some of these are going to be more applicable for the general population, for the majority of people, based on their genetics. You know, again, going back to nutrigenetics, we all have a certain gene compilation that certain foods vibe better with us than other foods. And also, every bite of food that we eat affects our genetic expression, regardless. So that's the two different nutrigenomics and nutrigenetics. And so a paleo framework might work more broadly because it's really focused more on an omnivore protocol. It's looking at some of these different potential problems with different toxins in plants. But humans, regardless of what that food is, for example, beans might be totally off the menu, literally, with that protocol.
Right.
But maybe your ancestors, like my wife in Kenya, have been having dengu, which is like a mung bean, for 1,000 years or whatever it is. And like now this is bad for you, right? And maybe their microbiome is just like, it has this really great affinity that's helping to reduce their risk of cardiovascular disease and their energy levels are high and all these different things that you can't have that now because that doesn't fit into this. And so what I would want is just people to be mindful of whatever diet framework it is. Don't allow yourself to be imprisoned by it. And a lot of times we do this out of a desire to feel better. And also we have a bigger desire too, many people, especially in LA, to eat better for the planet. And where the fatal flaw is when we feel better doing a certain diet framework, and then we believe that that's the right diet for everybody. And we become dogmatic.
Yes.
And we turn other people into villains or idiots because they're not consuming the food that you think is the best. And the truth is, there is no diet that is more spiritual. There is no diet that is more ethical when we're talking about real food that our ancestors all over the world have been eating for thousands of years.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about these things because that's why food is more than fuel, right? Because we all come from different cultures and belief systems and things that impact our choices. And if we do become too dogmatic about this one approach, we're not listening. We're not listening to other people's experiences. And that's where I think a lot of other issues can come up too, even beyond food, when we're not listening to the things that other people are about and what has happened to them. And I even think of specific examples just in not hearing what people have been doing, like white rice, can get villainized among certain people with certain approaches. But in certain cultures, that's one of the, primary foods that they eat all the time, or lentils. Someone was saying to a friend the other day, well, the lectins in the lentils are going to kill you. And he's like, well, but that's what I've been eating my whole life. And my ancestors have been eating their whole lives. And so it can get confusing for people. Yeah. And when they, just try to focus too much on being right versus understanding that maybe, just maybe, we don't know everything there is to know, and that there are multiple things that can be correct at the same time, even if it doesn't feel right for your body.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm grateful. Again, I have a unique perspective on this because I know the guys. Like, I know the face of vegan diets, like the top person in that, the carnivore diet, the same thing. These are my friends and colleagues.
Yes.
And all of them, and this is what I want to express, they all believe in service and helping people. That's why they're so adamant about their diet framework. But can they both be wrong, like lying that they're helping people with their diet framework?
Well-researched, smart people. It's challenging to think about, right?
Exactly. So the truth is they're both right and they're both wrong as well. Yeah. They're going to see some benefits for certain people, but what you don't hear about is the people who don't get the results on that particular diet framework, or get results temporarily, but then they change.
Or even beyond physical results? How are people mentally, physically, emotionally during these diet experiences?
Yeah,
it's
that
challenging.
part, there can be some deficiencies on any of these diet frameworks that tend to make us more agitated and inflammatory towards people that aren't doing the diet that we want.
Mhm.
Like that's a common thing you might see out there as well. Like that's not normal to start to villainize humans and, in lieu of like trying to save a chicken, and then you're like so much vitriol, and you would gladly stab a human who's going to eat a chicken.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where's the balance here?
Totally.
So, but again, all of these protocols have value, and some of my closest friends, and I've done this vegan protocol for 5 years, raw food, 100% raw food for 3 years in Missouri.
Wow.
You didn't know that.
How
you didn't
was
know that. It was something, but like that's what kind of dedication.
Yeah.
Like, and everything is figure outable.
Mm-hmm.
Even in those conditions. That's why when I would come out here to LA, it was like, oh my God, there's like raw food restaurants and all this stuff, and it's just like, but I'm by myself.
Mm-hmm.
We're making food every day, or uncooking food every day, and also teaching classes and all the things. And I felt wonderful for that like first year and a half, but then I developed some deficiencies. And because of my inquisitive nature, I was always finding, okay, well, let me find another food that can help maybe with my energy or with my cognitive performance or whatever. And this is why I know about so many foods that are now popular today. I'm probably much more than people are aware of, actually, even still. But, I would find, okay, well, Shilajit, I would try this out. And then I would notice, okay, I feel better for about a week, but then that goes away. Or, then I do chlorella or AFA blue-green algae or ashwagandha, or, the list goes on and on and on. I'm trying all these different things, Paudiarco, and, just all these different foods that humans have used for a long time, but none of them were really sustainable for me with the results I was looking for, because I'd always been a jump out of bed in the morning kind of person. And now after a year and a half, even with my experimentation, and by the way, I would villainize people that gave up on the raw food diet. People who are the face, I would go to raw food events, not in Missouri, of course, like Raw Spirit Fest. And I don't fit. I'm from Ferguson. I definitely, like, it was a whole different vibe. But when one of the speakers there had said that, okay, now he's only 80% raw, I'm like, oh, and he'd been doing it for 20 years. I'm like, you're not 100% anymore? Bro, you just don't know. You just don't know what you're doing.
Okay. So what was that change then for you? Because I was that way myself about when I was really, I developed an eating disorder. And so that's a whole nother ballpark, right? But what changed your mind there? Because I think there's something really powerful about being willing to change your mind when you learn new information. And I've changed my mind about many things. What was that for you with raw food?
There's two things. It was acknowledging what is, that this was not, something was not right. And also having a trusted advisor as well. And for me, that was a guy named Daniel Vitalis.
Okay.
And I saw that he was incorporating raw milk and eggs. And I'm just like, bro, wait a minute. And I, with that, I added eggs in. Now, it was kind of like a battery charge up experience. When I started eating eggs again, oh my goodness, like, and that energy wasn't going away after a week. It's like, oh, my body was actually missing this. That was the first part, but then also my wife getting pregnant with my youngest son and not wanting him to be an experiment.
Yeah.
And also adhering to her cravings, because she was craving.
Ella has some thoughts and feelings about that. That's enough.
That's awesome.
She's like, yes, he needs those foods.
Craving?
She's got cravings. I'm sure she does. She's like, where's my treats?
This is awesome. Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So your wife is experiencing cravings.
Yeah. And actually she was having something called Pica.
Okay. Yeah.
Where she was like really attracted to like soap.
Yeah.
And her sister experienced it as well, which was like chalk, And so she's deeply deficient in certain minerals, and just like wanting that, meat
I was just talking to
experience,
someone about this,
but
that
trying to do other things like, let me
Yes.
get your salt from this and that. We just eventually went to that farmer's market I mentioned, to the best possible, all the things, whatever. And, so it was a sadness, but man, she felt so much
Mhm.
better. Her desire to eat soap had gone away, and it was pretty wild. Like sometimes
Yeah.
she'd disappear when we go to Whole Foods.
Yeah.
And I didn't know this till after my son was born,
Wow.
that she'd be like going to the soap section. And this actually happened. This is so crazy.
Yeah.
And one day, and it made sense, I walked in on her in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of our bed with a bar of soap.
Mm.
She was fucking, no, I'm just sorry. She was having an affair with this soap.
Oh my gosh.
It's just like she was just sitting
Like
there
wanting
smelling
to eat
it.
it.
She might have, I don't know how far it was going to go.
Yeah.
But I didn't think about it too much at the time, that she just was tired, just sat there on the edge of the bed, whatever,
Yeah.
with the soap. But she was actually like wanting to be alone and, dabble in that soap.
For people who aren't familiar with pica, can you explain what that is?
Yeah. I mean, this can be a desire to eat things that we don't associate with human food, like chalk, charcoal, soap, things like that. And it's like a subconscious desire for certain things that are found in those things, right? So in particular, certain micronutrients. And it could be triggered by, again, a smell, or it could be triggered by, some kind of an experience or an accidental tryst with a thing.
Mm.
And, but it's really a big underlying piece of this is deficiencies.
Mm. I think there's power in that, being willing to take a step back, like you were saying, unplug and listen to what your body's saying, paying attention to all of these things. Because just because that is working for one person doesn't mean, maybe it can serve you in a period of time, but as things change, maybe you're experiencing symptoms or presentations of certain things and needing to make some adjustments based on what your body's needing.
Yeah. That's the secret that shouldn't be a secret, which is the ultimate guidance towards what food is best for you is listening to your body.
Mm-hmm.
But it's difficult to do that when we're like inundated with ultra processed foods, social media, and all these things distracting us from what our body is telling us is best. And also paying attention and being honest. That was ultimately what changed my diet framework. Was I had to get honest about the results I was seeing, what I was experiencing. That wasn't normal. That wasn't okay. That wasn't how I wanted to feel.
Right.
And though it felt amazing initially, but that was like my ultimate bridge to no longer eating anything fake, was that raw food protocol. And I did it to the best of my ability. And, in my practice, what I would do is, again, if I'm into that thing, that's what you're going to be into. But everything changed in the birthing of the Model Health Show and all these books when I checked myself and I started to pay attention to that person. And I started to ask about their life, their needs, their ancestry, right? Like, again, where are you from? Like, where's your mother from? Your grandmother? You're like, is there any, Greek? Oh, you've got some lineage over here in Iceland, or whatever the case might be. Like, let's look at some of those traditional foods, right? And start to incorporate those things that they enjoy.
Yeah.
And being able to find ways to upgrade things that, they enjoy that might be a quote bad food. And also helping people to stop putting so much morality attachment to foods as well, like good and bad, just reframing things. What's good for you, right? And from there, but it was, to be honest, it was a lot of work. It's very hard to base everything and to design programs based off of that one person. That's why I started the show. As part of the reason I started the show was, it was just like, this was not scalable for me to educate, because now I'm only able to see 3 people, 4 people a day versus, at a time when it was like 8 to 10. And in that 8 to 10, I was educating. If somebody's coming in with type 2 diabetes, I would reverse engineer, basically show them how the disease works. Like, here's your pancreas, I had a diagram, here's your pancreas and your beta cells and da-da-da. And I would see them light up like, oh my God, like I had no idea that this was happening in my body. All they did was get a diagnosis and a drug, right? But not being able to do that at the scale I was doing it, I felt like something was missing. And I was speaking at an event, and that's when a couple came up to me afterwards, and they were like, we just started this podcast, and this was like in 2011, and we were looking for somebody to be the face of it. And they told me about what they were doing, and they had all these like 1 million unique visitors to their site and all this stuff, and I had like 10 to my site, and I was like, "Oh, cool! I'll be happy to do it." Yeah. But in my head, I was like, what the fuck is a podcast?
Yeah.
And, but anyways, I started working with them. We did that show for 1.5 years. Cool. It had hundreds of thousands of downloads.
Wow.
This is back like 2011, 2012, which was astronomical. But I was building their brand, right? And I still had a certain pocket that I needed to be in. And that's when we amicably parted ways, and I started the Model Health Show. And the cool thing was I got to like work out certain things, because that's what a lot of people are afraid of as well to get started is, the inevitable growing pains of doing something new and becoming excellent at it. And so right out of the gate, I knew what I was doing. I was in my power and my voice. And so it's crazy. Thousands of people every single month, thousands of people listen to episode 1 and start from there and listen all the way up for the past over 10 years of the show. I just got a message from somebody yesterday. They posted on a YouTube video that they had just found out about me maybe 2 years ago, and they've listened to, they're up to episode 400 now.
Wow.
Because they're just listening to it from start to finish, right? It's so amazing, man. But this speaks to, taking action to do something uncomfortable and understanding you're not going to be excellent at something when you first start, and that's okay. And, for me, the real connective tissue of the Model Health Show, of the Eat Smarter Family Cookbook, is that everybody's invited. It's inclusive. We've got a significant portion of our audience that are vegetarian, vegan, paleo, carnivore, because I speak to all of that, because I have life experience in all of that. But also, even in the cookbook, I very intentionally provided a burger for everyone. So we've got the Boss Burger, which is the quintessential epic grass-fed burger, beef burger. I've got the salmon burger for my pescatarian folks, being able to have the salmon burgers. It's my favorite recipe right now.
Ooh.
It's my favorite one right now.
Try that one.
It is it's fire. It's so good. And then to get people away from this insanely ultra processed veggie burger out there, like the Impossible Burgers and all that stuff, and not to villainize them. Every now and then that's okay, but that's not real food. And so we've got a veggie burger that is utilizing real food ingredients, right? And there's so many other recipes like that cater to, if you want to make this a vegan version, the tortilla soup, for example, is another great example. You can add shredded chicken to it or not, but that tortilla soup is fire.
So good.
So
that's one of the things that I really appreciate and respect about you is you are respectful to everyone, regardless. Shawn, I have a million other questions that I have for you, specifically around like the podcast and your books and some of the business side of what you do. But I think we might need to do a 2.0.
I agree.
Would that be okay?
That'd be awesome.
Because I have so many things that I am dying to know, but I know that we are already over an hour.
Let's schedule it. Because this is my first time having a dog on my lap during a podcast. And this is awesome.
Well, she's clearly loving it very much. She's asleep, I think. So, yes. Well, Shawn, this was so helpful. Please tell me about the books. I've read both of them, so I know about them, but please tell everyone else about Eat Smarter and the cookbook.
Awesome. So I'm so grateful. Thank you. Even just being able to look at this, like I can't believe that I created this.
You created these.
Yeah. I'm in awe of this every day. Again, coming from where I come from, this should not be possible, to me to have books in Target and like, bookstores in China, and like, it's amazing. My first book was Sleep Smarter, and it's an international bestseller. It's translated into 23 different countries, different languages. And it really sparked the sleep wellness movement, and sleep wellness related books have come after that, but traditionally had never done well. And I believe it's because of the practicality of it and making a subject that might not seem very attractive, turning it into something sexy. And, being, again, very practical. There's 21 clinically proven strategies for improving sleep quality in the book. But what that did was, as a nutritionist, that put me in a different stratosphere. So when I talk about food, my microphone is so much louder. And I got to write the book that I really wanted to write, which was Eat Smarter. And it came out at the end of 2020. It's USA Today national bestseller. And it changed the game. It really did. And I'm so grateful. Like, it was on the charts in the top 10 with like Matthew McConaughey and like
Wow.
Michelle Obama. And this is a book on food. You know, it's like, that's crazy. At a time when everybody is really focused on, you know, we're consumed with fear and disempowerment, really, that, you know, there's nothing that we can do to be well right now. And the story is very different. And my mission is to help people to become more resilient, because the next thing is coming, you know, whatever that might be. But to have people who are mentally strong and resilient, especially under pressure, is super important, because what tends to happen is stress hits the fan and we devolve into very primitive approaches to things. And we need a lot more love and connection. But, you know, as the data indicates in Eat Smarter, you know, I looked at food through not just one lens of metabolic health, which I did a masterclass on that in the book. And actually, for the first time in book form, I walk people through how fat loss works. Like, where does fat go? Like, how does this process actually work? And we dive into the epicaloric controllers. So things that control what calories do in your body. Because a calorie in, calorie out that I was taught in my university education that I paid good money, was wildly inadequate. And so, but also we look at how food impacts our cognitive performance, how food impacts our emotional stability and mood and emotional intelligence. And I highlight how even with prison inmates, improving their nutrition, and a couple of peer-reviewed studies had more impressive results in reducing aggressive behavior and in reducing what they called behavioral offenses and violent offenses, more so than any other intervention.
Wow.
It's insane. It's crazy. Like, some researchers that came across that actually repeated the study, you know, with a different set of prison inmates, because they couldn't believe it, because it works so much better than any other intervention. And so truly, you know, a lot of times we don't do well because we don't feel well. And our ability to perspective take to metabolize stress has a lot to do with our nutrition. And at the end of the day, I was so surprised at how many people, because the recipe section in Eat Smarter was so small, I was shocked, but that shouldn't have been, because of social media, at how many people were making recipes and posting them on social media. And I was like, you know what, when it really boils down to it, it's about food. It's just about eating delicious food. And I started off, as I mentioned earlier, I was teaching classes. I was teaching food classes, like food preparation classes. And that's how I started speaking, was because of that. And so I'm about that life when it comes to food and deliciousness. And my stepfather was actually a chef.
Cool.
And so we always had a family of flavor, a family of creativity when it comes to food, even not having a lot of money. And so, you know, with all this experience and knowing that the bridge between I want to get well and I want to eat healthy food, to unite those bridges, it has to be through deliciousness, not through like making the jump from, you know, McDonald's to wheatgrass shot. Like,
oh my gosh,
that jump, you might as well jump off the bridge. Like,
Right.
that's too big of a bridge to try to cross. But what if we take some of our favorite foods and improve the quality and the ingredients? Like you mentioned, the salmon burger in there, the sweet potato protein pancakes, the dark cherry frozen yogurt pops that are on the front cover, for example, is something that I grew up in the hood. So we had the bomb pop man or the ice cream man
Right.
would come around. It's like a ding, 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 like a bell or
Yes.
some music. And we'd be coming out of like all the nooks and crannies of the neighborhood, going crazy. Ice cream man's coming. Try to get $1, try to find your mom. And we like our little sweet frozen treats. But what if we have something that is deeply, deeply health affirmative? Like, those cherries are used for specific reasons. The anthocyanins in cherries, I share a study in the book, that they've been found to literally target fat cells and potentially shrink fat cells. And it's one of the densest sources of naturally occurring melatonin in the food kingdom. So all kinds of cool stuff like that. And
well,
of
that's
course,
the beauty of it too, right? Is all of these nutrients that are in these foods. But if we just find a book like this, where we know the ingredients are nutritious, we don't have to think, oh man, okay, I haven't had a good source of copper today. No, let's just get a variety of different foods in lots of different colors and textures that you have already outlined in a book like this. And we can just eat and enjoy and know that we're being nourished.
If there's one book to get, it is the Eat Smarter Family Cookbook. It is the consolidation of Eat Smarter, is that science is in there, plus all the delicious food and also the entertainment value, the beauty of the book itself. I'm seeing this book is a staple in people's kitchen now, just like it stays in the kitchen. So, and also we have some of the science around sleep wellness. In particular, you can have the most fancy mattress and blacked out curtains, but if you don't have the nutrients that you need to build sleep-related hormones and neurotransmitters, you're going to struggle with your sleep. And so we're addressing that in there as well. So it's a really special book. It's available everywhere that books are sold. Amazon has, because it really took off on Amazon, they actually reduced the price. So people can save like $10 off the list price on Amazon right now. But of course, support your local bookstores. We want to help keep them open.
Yes.
Independent bookstores, Barnes & Noble, all that good stuff. And Barnes & Noble online, you can get the book too. And yeah, it's a really special book. And, you know, just looking at it might make you hungry.
I already am. And then your podcast, The Model Health Show, they can find it in iTunes, Spotify, all of the places. Any other places that people can find you that you want to share?
I think that's more than enough. Our plate is full.
Great. I love it. Well, Shawn, thank you so much for coming. You are truly incredible.
Thank you. It's been awesome. And again, this is my first podcast with a sleeping dog on my lap, and it's such a pleasure. Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here. Can you share a little bit about what a root canal is and your perspective on root canal?
Yeah, so a root canal is a classical conventional dentistry treatment, and you need it as an acute pain treatment. It's never been a good idea to leave something dead in your body or dead tissue in your body.